It's the Sod Pod, brought to you by Grassland Agro. The Sod Pod.
Hello, and welcome to the Sod Pod. So, bit of a different structure today, interchange of the proceedings. Our host, James, has departed, so James, we wish you all the best for the future. You'll be, I suppose, definitely a favourite among the farmers out there in the past with the host on the Sod Pod, and definitely a familiar voice. But look, nonetheless, I'm sure we'll be hearing from you in the future, and as always, the door is open on the Sod Pod. So I suppose, look, we'll kick off today, and we're going to move over to Clodagh here. Clodagh, you were down in Cork this week at, was it the local mart? There was a bit of a meeting, I think, with the Minister of Ag in terms of, I suppose, the derogation and some of the NAP proposals, was it?
Yeah, so Monday evening I attended the derogation meeting. It was ran by the IFA there in Corn Mart. So the Minister for Agriculture was in attendance there. So, there was a great turnout on the night. There was over 2,000 between farmers, industry representatives, the lads from the co-ops, contractors, all sorts. They had tractors outside, milk tanks, all sorts, with the beacons on and everything. So there was a couple of different presentations on the night. A couple of the guys from the IFA spoke. I think their presentations were very good. The message, I think, really hit home. And I suppose, look, the minister can't walk away and say that he doesn't understand what the issues are or what the concerns are by farmers. There was other presentations there by the president of the MACRA, Josephine O'Neill, Dairy Industry Ireland, Beef Industry Ireland, and ICOS as well. So the minister then said a few words then after that, and it was kind of a Q&A structure. So I suppose different industry representatives and farmers got to voice their concerns about losing the derogation. So I suppose, look, it was great to see the turnout, and it was very well ran by the IFA, so it was great for farmers to get a chance to talk to the minister and voice their concerns. But I suppose, look, a couple of key messages for me anyway, by being at the talk was it's going to be a whole industry effect. If the derogation goes, it's going to affect every single farmer, not just dairy farmers. It's going to have a massive effect on farm income, and a massive effect as well across the industry in terms of milk pool, meat output and everything. It's going to affect jobs, and I suppose as well, even from Josephine O'Neill's presentation on young farmers in particularly, it's going to make it very, very hard for them to, I suppose, take on family farms, or even young farmers that are that mightn't even be from a farm to take on a farm. It's going to be physically impossible because land price will just go through the roof. But
I think that's a huge point, Clodagh. Something you mentioned me there earlier was I thought it made an impact on me anyway, to replace the land required if the derogation is lost to keep stock numbers the same would be the size of Kildare. Like that's puts it in perspective really, and as you said, it is affecting every farmer, and it even includes tillage farmers, because if land rental goes up that much, tillage farming won't be viable at all. I think Kieran McAvoy mentioned that, the IFA chair for grain, but it's going to have a huge impact on the whole agricultural sector, not just dairy farmers.
I think it even showed that in the day. Like there was definitely one or two tillage farmers that did voice that to the minister on the day, and like farmers travelled from Monaghan, from West Cork. It was all across the country, so it definitely, I think it did voice a big message to the minister. Like,
yeah, and look, fair play I suppose to all who did turn out and to showed up their support for it. And I suppose, like, even from the planning point of view, like, any business needs to know where they're going, and obviously farming, you're putting your stock in calf that 9 months in advance, not knowing where you're going from one year to the next in terms of having the derogation, from a stocking rate point of view, it's a disastrous scenario to be in. So really from a, the whole planning point of view there, from just, I suppose, the year to year on farm, but even for doing financial budgets for farmers, or even the thing of, I suppose, what sort of stock numbers is going to be there, is that going to be viable then for the next generation? There's a huge knock-on effect, I think, right throughout, more than just the year-to-year basis in terms of the full farm family and the whole inheritance piece. So definitely it is something that we were hoping to try and that will be renewed. I suppose with that, on the derogation too, there's been a bit of noise recently, I suppose, as well. We have we've seen a draft consultation on the nitrates action programme, and I suppose there's been some changes proposed there before the new one is implemented in January 2026. I suppose from the tillage point of view, Stephen, I think you were saying there was a bit of a change or potential proposal there.
In fairness, it's a small change, but it's kind of a welcome one on the tillage front. In fairness, it's to do with the stubble cultivation post-harvest. So it was a requirement to disc stubbles within 2 weeks of harvesting the crops, but that's actually been got rid of now because there's still work ongoing in Teagasc to see the impact of that on habitats for birds. So it could be actually doing more harm than good. But from the point of view of a farmer, it's probably welcome because it was another job at a busy time of year and weren't seeing much reward from it. Personally myself now, I have a min-till system at home, and we'd be actually doing that anyway. It's quite beneficial from a grass feed point of view. But I suppose the fact that we had to do 75% of the stubble in the country, it could have been having a negative impact on birds, or just the overwinter covering for birds. So it's probably a welcome change on the tillage front.
And I suppose seeing too on the dairy, there's proposals there as well. I suppose farmers now are going to have to maybe declare their stocking rate, and I know this is only a proposal stage, but I suppose it's a strong indication of where the policy or direction is looking. And based on that, then obviously that may impact, I suppose, in terms of how nutrients is distributed across the farm, maybe from a organic point of view, your slurry, but then also maybe it might have some effect on the chemical end. I suppose the big change in this one compared to other drafts or NAPs that were published in the past, or there was no direct cut, I suppose, in chemical end, which is something that over the last couple of years we have seen all farms, I suppose, impose a 10% cut. And even some of the higher stock farms were lost to 5% on top of that. So I suppose it seems to be more focused on, I suppose, nutrient distribution at the minute. And even, I suppose, when we were talking about the derogation there earlier, Clodagh, I've seen some additional measures introduced there as well, where they're potentially looking at, overall N&P balance on a per hectare basis. So I suppose it's one we're just going to have to watch and see how it plays out. And, that is something that, if we think of NI in Northern Ireland, that's something they're already working off. So look, as the saying goes, it'll be one just have to watch this space and see how the consultation progresses and what comes out of it.
I suppose it will, as we're doing a Grassland Agro, it's going to become more and more important to get the most out of the soil again. Obviously less chemical nitrogen applied. We're going to have to focus more on roots yet again to try and maintain the grass yields, and maybe impossible to maintain the grass yields, but to reduce the reduction yields as much as possible.
I think you're right, Stephen. Like you would notice that, Joe, in terms of the conversations when we're out on farm, a lot of the time, in the past might have been trying to grow more and more, whereas now we're trying to just match what we grew in the past without having any kind of trying to do it with less. So it's all back to that full soil health piece, But
I suppose, it's not even trying to reinvent the wheel. It's stuff we're talking about for years, optimising lime usage, getting your pH right, coming back and building up your P's and K's in the soil, to, as you said, Stephen, to get more out of it, improving roots. It's stuff we're talking about with years, Absolutely, and I suppose a huge part of that, as I suppose we're always a regular or reference frequently in the podcast, is the soil sampling. And John, there's a bit of change in, I suppose, or a few more rules we have to be aware of this year.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I suppose we're in the month of November now. Typically, the back end of the year is a popular time for farmers to get out and do their soil sampling. It's important, I suppose, first of all, to be aware that you must wait at least 3 months before taking your soil samples from your last application of chemical or organic phosphorus or potassium. And for lime, it's 2 years. So they're just some things to bear in mind just for yourself, just if you want to get a good representative sample for your nutrient management plan. And yeah, you're right, Peter. This year, new regulations come in from the 15th of September of this year. You now have to have a georeference or a lipis parcel ID reference with your soil sample. That's just a new regulation that's brought in. I suppose the regulations come in just to improve, I suppose, data integrity, precision with regards to linking a soil sample to the result and all of that. So that's just something to bear in mind. And just while we're talking about soil sampling, we talked about it in another couple of episodes, taking your sample, the process of actually getting a proper sample is crucial in order to get a good result. So that starts off with your soil auger, making sure that has the ability to get down in a grassland scenario to 10 centimetres. So just measuring the end of the auger to make sure it's not worn over the ears, make sure that it can get down the full 10 centimetres. That's particularly important for, I suppose, your permanent grassland swards. Make sure that the auger is clean. You don't want any rust on it. You don't want any soil from a previous field for cross-contamination. Getting out, doing your W shape, getting your 20 cores, pooling your samples at the end before you put it in the box or the bag. Just prevent, I suppose, to get your representative sample, that you're not losing a bit of a core that might be important for I suppose your end result. Lab and analytical methods tend to be very good, in fairness, in the lab. So getting a good sample is very important. And I suppose avoiding the likes of ring feeders, water troughs, ditches when you're doing your W across the field, and all that. So they're just things to bear in mind, And
I suppose it sounds like a very basic thing to do, but really, you're touching getting down to 10 centimetre depth. Stephen, in the tillage scenario, he places a big emphasis on the phosphorus.
Yeah.
And, that ties into the depth of it.
That's very important because phosphorus is so immobile in the soil. And I suppose it's very important in permanent pasture or in minimum tillage or no till situations where you're not mixing the soil. So if you're constantly applying fertiliser to the surface of the soil and the phosphorus isn't moving down very far, if you're not getting your full soil sample depth and you're sampling too shallow, you get an artificially high phosphorus reading. And then you're effectively reducing your own phosphorus allowance through taking the soil sample poorly. So it's very much in the farmer's interest, because realistically farmers love to have a phosphorus allowance so that they can apply a bit of chemical phosphorus to land to get it going. Just to make sure you're not doing yourself out of your own allowance through poor sampling. And another point John mentioned there was just making sure it can be tricky enough to get the 3 months between an application of fertiliser and slurry. Or even, there could be dairy washings go at this time of year that could skew the results as well. You have to be very careful when you take a soil sample too. It's a short enough window between the close period and when you're going out again with maybe your next application of slurry could be the end of January. Just trying to pick the right time.
I suppose them results are going to do you for up to 4 years, so you might as well try and get it right while you're at it.
Definitely,
sure.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I suppose you mentioned there the geo-reference, I suppose, for the farmer listening to this, wondering how to go about that. A soil sampler, I know our guys now have it in the app, so it's just to make sure that, whoever's doing your soil samples, that have the GPS coordinates on it. That'd be fair to say, would it?
Yeah. Like even the app we have, so what it does when the soil sampler goes out and they're walking their W across the field, it's taken up that longitude and latitude coordinates, so it's actually linked to the sample. But I suppose, look, if you don't have that access to a soil sampler, that'll do that for you. Us here at Grassland Agro will, but you can use your lipis number. So when you go to do your BIS application with your farm advisor, you'll get the maps of your farm, and that'll have your corresponding lipis number on it as well. So just once you have if you're taking your own samples, once you have the corresponding lipis number, you should be good to go.
Any confusion or you're not sure where to get it, your local advisor, your local Grassland Agro rep is there to help. You can get your BIS maps on Ag Food, and you can get your lipis ID parcel number there, but there is help out there if you're unsure or worried about that.
So that's 3 important things then. Number 1, obviously, that you're getting a representative sample in terms of getting down the right depth, so that you're not doing, number 1, yourself out of phosphorus allowances, but also then that you can actually have that phosphorus allowance to put it onto the crop or the plant that actually needs it. So that in the long term, over that 4-year period, that your soil fertility isn't suffering. The second point is making sure then you have your lipis number or your geo-reference coordinated and linked to the soil sample. And then the third point was
to making sure you have sufficient time after application of fertiliser or slurry.
That's the one, Steve.
That's the one,
Saved the day.
And something else to bear in mind as well, the typical recommendation is to take soil sample every 2 to 4 hectares, maximum is 5 hectares, so that's just something to bear in mind as well. Label your bags well, have a farm map, have each sample correspond to the field, simple things like that. When you have your soil samples taken, try and get them going to the lab as quick as you can, because samples will deteriorate the longer you leave it, especially on the dashboard of the car or the Jeep. Sunlight getting in, just try and get it going to the lab as quick as possible, if possible the day you take them.
No, makes sense. All very good advice.
My own spin on it would actually be, obviously you have to go every 4 years, but at home now I'd like to go at least I go every 2 years with a soil sample, because we're importing a lot of organic manure, and sometimes you're not really that sure what exactly is in it. Some could be stronger than others, and we're seeing indexes fluctuating up and down. So by taking samples more regularly, we can adjust the plan, and we're seeing fluctuations there. So there's more scope for making savings, or maybe spotting the field that's after dropping down. It's just something else, because price of soil sampling, if you work it out, maybe €27 for a sample or whatever, it depends. Over across 10 acres, it's only $2.70 an acre, and if it does it for 2 years, it's only $1.25 an acre. Wouldn't cost much fertilizer, like.
And I suppose on that, Stephen, you're probably now, with the crop rotations and planning for next year and doing up nutrient management plans, probably on the tillage front. That's up. I suppose on the grassland side of things, like that, we're sort of in that period. We're making sure that, number one, the P&K is out long enough that we can actually get out and sample. Obviously, in a lot of farms, that's a wee bit too early yet, but we are working through it where we can. On the tillage side of things, where are you at?
So obviously the tillage situation, the P&K is out a long time now. There's no bother soil sampling away this time of year. So it's, and like for next year the allowances are the same, so we can start making a nutrient management plan straight away now and have them ready for the springtime. So I suppose the things we need are the same as ever. We need to know what crop we're growing in the coming year, because different crops have different allowances for P and requirements for K. For your nitrogen allowance, it's based on the previous crop. So the likes of your continuous cereals will be index 1. You'll have your highest nitrogen allowance then, because there isn't much nitrogen residual in the soil. After legume or the likes or oilseed rape will be index 2. There's a bit of nitrogen left in the soil, so you won't need to apply as much to the following crop. And then if you're ploughing up after grass, it's where you get your biggest hit of nitrogen mineralization. So you have your lowest nitrogen allowance there. So that's all built into the nutrient management plan. And then you're also adding in the fact that if you had a higher yield in the base yield in the previous 3 years in wheat, barley or oats, you can get a higher nitrogen or phosphorus allowance depending on how much higher the yield is over the base yield. So that's all built into nutrient management plan. Our planner is very, very useful that way, because it takes all that into consideration, because it's hard enough. I've tried making an Excel sheets before, but there's a lot of formulas to create. There's other people making nutrient management plans, but I suppose our one is very useful in that at the end it spits out what fertilizer exactly you need and how many tons, rather than just giving you your allowances. It's also good because you also need to take organic manure imports into consideration, and also you need to take your opening stock of fertilizer into consideration. But there's it's very good few moving parts there, but our plan is fairly straightforward. It gives you a very straightforward plan for the farmer. Like,
so when you're going out and farm these days, you're at that stage, I suppose, and actually deciding now which field is being sold with whatever crop next year, and you're doing up your allowances. And
yeah, exactly, because I suppose winter crops are in the ground now, and we have a fair idea what spring crops are going to be going, whether it's spring beans, spring barley, or spring oats or the likes. I suppose on the winter crops front, I might just give an update. Oilseed rape is obviously flying now, and we saw great grass growth in September, but I suppose it's a bit similar for oilseed rape because it was sown in August. There was serious biomass grew there in September, so crops aren't really looking too strong, if anything. Some farmers have gone out there recently to spray for light leaf spot with prothioconazole, and maybe they haven't gone so yet. And if crops are looking a bit strong, you could also go with tebuconazole, because that gives disease control for the light leaf spot, but it also gives a bit of a plant growth regulation effect too. I suppose in terms of the sowing, then a lot of sowing was done. We got that lovely dry spell of weather at the start of October for winter cereals, and we kind of see the wet weekend was coming, so everyone was planning to get everything in before that. So I think largely wheat, barley and rye have been sown, except for maybe after crops of spuds. The only exception there is oats. Some people are holding off sowing oats because it's a little bit early before that heavy rain came, but there's been such heavy rain since that probably hasn't been anything sown since. And it's probably not the end of the world because there's such high stocks of oats around the country, so might be no harm, there's a little bit less sown this year. There's a lot of pre-emergence herbicides applied as well, which are great for grass weed control. I suppose if people miss the boat, if the weather caught them, you can still apply them residual products post-emergence. They're not quite as effective, but they are probably more effective than some of the selective herbicides in the springtime. But one to note is that the metribuzin products are no longer be allowed to be applied after 23rd of November. They're off-label, they're off the market. So that's just one to note.
So just say that again. Which products were they, Stephen?
Metribuzin is the active ingredient to be in the likes of Firebird Met.
Okay.
So any stocks you have of that are meant to be used up by the 23rd of November, or not used at all, because that active ingredient is no longer permitted on farms next year. So that's just one to remember. Then the last thing, I suppose, in terms of the tillage front for the year is just keep on top of aphids and insecticide control. Weather hasn't been that cold. There have been a few cold spells, but probably not enough to kill aphids. They mightn't be as active, but they could easily get active if temperatures got milder again. For the likes of your rye or your BYDV tolerant barley, you might need an insecticide. You can kind of weigh it up depending on weather conditions, and Teagasc are measuring aphid flights as well, but you could go with your pyrethroid there, the lambda-based products, at 50 ml per hectare. Interestingly, for the first time in a long time, there's a new insecticide on the market, carnadine, I believe it's called, and that could be a new option, as there's no known resistance amongst aphids to that product, so that could be a good one for the likes of your non-BYDV barley or your wheat. So that can be applied from tillering onwards, but I think, as I said in another podcast, I think BYDV is a huge issue in cereal crops at the moment, with winter seeming to be milder the whole time, and just the effect of having on yields. We can't afford to lose them when margins are so tight.
And I suppose just for myself, I suppose the non-tillage farmer, like typically, how long would you notice, like if you walk a field on a Monday, when you could think obviously right, it's fine. How often would you want to be going back into?
Depends on the weather. If it was very cold, I wouldn't be in a big panic, but if things are mild, there probably is going to be aphids. They could be hard spotted, but really, ideally, you would like to be seeing a few before you spray, because it is a non-selective insecticide. It's going to kill your beneficials as well. So I suppose I'd put it that you'd spray as much as necessary, but as little as possible, because you're wiping everything out. Mm-hmm. But it is a necessary evil, really.
So I suppose, like all things in farming, it depends on the weather and the climate that's there, so there's not really a straightforward answer.
No, never a straightforward answer, no. That's for sure.
You'll be saying one thing today and you watch the forecast tonight and realise that plan's going to change.
Yeah, that's how it goes.
So I suppose moving from the tillage over to the silage now, pits I think are starting to definitely be open. We had a lot of rain there now in the last week or so. Cows probably in parts of the country, and I suppose grazing limited in certain areas. Clodagh, you were taking a wee look, I suppose, at some of the silage samples that have been coming in so far. What's the thoughts, or where are we at with them?
Yeah, I suppose, look, it's an important tool for farmers to have, I think, especially this time of the year, so that they can make decisions on, I suppose, what they're going to feed to young stock when they come in, what they're going to feed to lactating cows, what they're going to feed to the dry cow. So also it'll help, I suppose, farmers reduce the risk of health issues such as acidosis creeping up, milk fever, grass tetany, that kind of thing. So I suppose just before I go into what we look for on the report, the report is only as good as the sample you actually take. So if you're looking to take a silage sample from your pit, you're looking to get kind of an overall sample, so you need to be using a silage core, getting down through all layers of the silage pit. Take 5 to 6 silage cores and send that off to the lab. Make sure to stay away from mouldy patches and things like that. You can take a sample off the face of the pit as well, which will give you an indication of what animals are currently consuming now. just to make sure, go in your W pattern and take a few fistfuls of the silage. A lot of bales are on farm this year. Just look, given certain parts of the country was a good grass growing year, a lot of surplus bales were cut off paddocks as well. So, you can, if you're taking samples off bales, every 10 to 15 bales to take a sample. But I suppose you can be kind of cute as well about how you stack your bales as well. If a field over the summer went too strong on you, but it's good, fresh, leafy, good quality grass, make sure to stack that at one side of the yard. But if it's a field that just went, I suppose, a little bit heavy, a bit kind of dirty on you, that mightn't be the best of quality, to stack that into another side of the yard as well. Just, I suppose, you need to know what you have, and it'll allow you to make some decisions. So I suppose in terms of the report, then you're looking to see how well your silage actually preserved, and how what the quality is going to be like as well. So in terms of looking at how well your silage actually preserved, you're looking at your dry matter percentage and your pH. So the target for your dry matter percentage is between 25 and 32%. It can be quite variable. What we typically see is between 15 and 40%. So your more wetter type silage is going to lead to, I suppose, a poorer fermentation. Can lower intakes by cows as well. If it's too dry, then on the other side, it can be quite hard to pack in the pit as well. And it could be a higher risk of mold developing as well because of air getting into it. Your pH also is a good indicator of how well your silage has preserved. You need to have a good pH to promote good bacterial growth, so the likes of your lactobacillus. So I suppose the target pH for a wetter type silage would be between 3.8 to 4.2, and for your drier silage then 4.5. If the pH goes too dry or too high, it can lead to higher butyric acid production as well. So then, just in terms of how, I suppose, what kind of quality silage you're dealing with in terms of your DMD, so dry matter digestibility, the target is over 74% for a high performing animal. For a dry cow, around 68% to be fine. But I suppose this is quite variable on farm. The average what we see is 68%, which seems all right, but there's a lot of silage above that 68%, which is all well and good, but there's a lot of silage that's below that 68% as well, which if you are feeding that to young stock coming in November, coming off grass, they can fall back fairly quickly. Another thing to look at as well is your protein percentage. So you can either look at your crude protein or your PDI. So I suppose most farmers would be well versed on the crude protein percentage. Target is between 14 and 16%. The only thing with crude protein is it gives you a holistic view of the protein supplied in the diet, but not actually what's being used up by the animal. So if you want to know what's actually being utilised, you're looking at your PDI, which is protein digestible in the intestine. So it's how much the animal is actually able to utilise. So the two figures you're looking at is PDIN and PDIE. So the main thing is the target is to have them over 80 grams per kilogram of dry matter. But the main thing is to have them fairly well balanced. They don't have to be spot on, but fairly well balanced. NDF then will give you a fairly good indication of the fibre content in your silage as well. So less than 50% is ideal for high performing animals. 55 to 60% then is okay for maintenance as well. So too much fibre in the diet can slow down fermentation and lead to lower intakes, whereas too little fibre will speed up fermentation and can lead to the likes of to acidosis and things like that. Not ideally what you want to be dealing with. So they're just a couple of indicators to keep in mind.
And I suppose on that fibre content, I suppose, yes, we're looking at, I suppose, the results, because that's what we're feeding now, but you can get some indications in terms of what sort of stage or quality the grass was cut at. The likes of that NDF figure, if we see that over that 50 mark, the reality is they probably went a little too far in terms of the stem content, so you're going to lose out on some of that DMD. You referenced there about 68 DMD. I'm just going to refer to, I suppose, the spring calving cow that's typically coming into her dry period now, or obviously still milking, but I suppose we're maybe thinking about, depending on when you start calving drying off, that 68 to 70 DMD silage. Like, if you have a cow that's severely thin, and we're going to sort of talk, maybe mention on the body condition score and side of things, the ideal scenario, we want that cow to be around 3.25 calving down at that sort of 68, 70 DMD silage, over your typical 8-week dry period. You're probably safe enough.
Yeah.
But like, if you're picking out, I suppose, bottom 10% of cows who are quite thin at the moment, that may not be enough. And the reality is, like, there's plenty of that poor quality silage on farm. And I suppose then the same stands to, if you've really good quality silage, pushing above that 75 DMD, and you're, overall you're happy with the condition your cows are in, feeding that over that 8-week dry period or so, you could actually over-condition the cows and lead to other metabolic diseases, which is just something that has to be weighed up. And I suppose then on the mineral side of it, Clodagh, what are we looking at? I know, are we seeing much high potassium? Sometimes it can be an issue we have to look for from a milk point of view.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely think it's worth farmers testing silage for a mineral analysis. I know, look, it is a little bit more expensive. I think it's about €100 per sample. But look, if you're going to save yourself the likes of milk fever or cows going down with grass tetany in the springtime, the returns are fairly big. So look, what we kind of generally see, or what we look out for on a mineral analysis, would be your potassium levels, as you said, Peter. So typically we want them below 2.4. If potassium's too high in silage, which is quite common across the country, it can significantly reduce magnesium uptake. And if cows can't actually self-mobilize magnesium, so they need to have that magnesium in the diet. And if it's too low, it can result in the likes of grass tetany. So especially that 2 to 3 weeks coming up to calving, you'd want to be definitely staying clear of that high K silage. So you need to know, I suppose, what you're dealing with. Another thing as well, what we might see coming back in reports as well, is actually a low magnesium content in the silage, which will have to be supplemented to the animal as well. I suppose magnesium is very important for muscle function and stuff. So if the cow is coming into her calving period and I suppose her muscles aren't primed up well, it can lead to slower calvings, retained cleanings, and I suppose with the fact of slower calvings, the calf is already going to be, I suppose, on the back foot as well. Another thing as well to look for is the likes of your phosphorus as well. If it's too high, it has a correlation to milk fever as well. So there's just a couple of things to keep in mind. Yeah, and I suppose that all ties back into, I suppose, when we're looking at the minerals, having a good mineral pack there as well for the dry cow. Obviously, you're always going to be looking for the magnesium content, for the point you mentioned in terms of priming the release of calcium. That when the cow does hit a low blood calcium level, which is inevitable at that, I suppose, around that calving period, that she's able to sufficiently mobilise calcium from her bones and obviously get over that, I suppose, the hurdle in terms of the drop in her blood calcium level. I suppose vitamin D is one that we always look for as well. Very important in terms of the absorption of the calcium, and also help with that mobilisation. But then also your various different trace minerals as well. The likes of your selenium, copper, iodine. Very important from, I suppose, a calf health point of view. And even worth noting that the frequency, I suppose, minerals are fed is important as well. Take magnesium and iodine, for example. They're not stored in the animal's body for any long period of time, so it's very important that they have access to them, on a continuous basis, regardless of the way you're feeding your mineral. Just to be aware of that, for example, on a bolus isn't going to suffice in that scenario. So it's just to be aware of these things. And I think in that situation, Peter, as well, you need to look on farm and see what you're kind of working with, because if you're restricted on headspace as well and you're only feeding out pre-calver mineral once a day, guaranteed. There's a lot of the cows in the herd that aren't getting access to that. So look, whether you go out with your bag mineral 2 or 3 times a day, or you decide to use 2 forms of mineral, use a bag mineral and a mineral block, you need to just, I suppose, assess it and make sure that the cows are getting their 120 grams a day.
And they're handy as well. You can just hang them up and they're up and out of the way.
Especially I suppose we have our own mineral block range, and our pre-caver would be fairly a popular block, but a lot of farmers would buy that block for that purpose as well, just to know that the animals are getting their requirement.
And you were saying they were hanging them up, John. I suppose the height there we would always recommend too is important to try, and so you naturally will see a lot of saliva produced around the block, which is a very powerful pH buffer, so it's to try and just get as much as that back down the throat of the animal.
Exactly.
Sodium bicarbonate content. That'd be fair to say.
100%. Very important for buffering the rumen. And then when you talk about height, usually just above the cow's back, 5'8", 5'9" in height is usually the height we set it at. People do often wonder about that.
Yeah. No, so look, I suppose from the silage point of view, then a couple of key points, Cody, you're saying get it tested to know what you're dealing with in terms of the DMD, and then based off that you will know probably in terms of what you're trying to strive to perform, be it young weanings putting on 0.5, 0.6 kilos of a day, or whether it's dry cows needing to put on 0.5 of body condition score, or those maybe who need to even do a little bit more, or in that case you're probably looking at either a longer dry period or adding in some form and maybe concentrate. That'd be the optimum way of doing it.
Yep, definitely. And even you just mentioned the body condition score there, Peter. I know you were talking about that during the week. What were your kind of thoughts on it?
Yeah, well, I suppose, look, it's a chance really. I suppose the importance or the significance of it really is, getting the cow calving down in the right body condition. Yeah, it gets past, I suppose, the milk fever element in terms of that she's in the right condition, that she's not going to be hit with metabolic issues. But in terms of obviously teeing up that animal going forward over that next 10, 12 weeks after calving, before she heads into breeding season, hugely important. I suppose inevitably there's always going to be a period there where the cow is going to lose condition after calving. That's to do with her dry matter intakes and her production ramping up, I suppose, ahead of her dry matter intakes. That's inevitable. So but what we can do is try and minimise that, and that sort of starts by doing a body condition check of the herd now, in that we can dry them off, give them the optimum dry period. If we need to give them longer to get them into better body condition at calving, to tee them up for then that breeding season, so be it. Or in the case of getting your silage tested to know, well, I'm playing here with a very poor quality silage. My typical practice in the past of just ad lib feeding silage and the dry cow mineral only isn't going to work this year. If you're playing down around 64 DMD silage, you're against the wall in terms of trying to put any kind of condition there on the cow, and vice versa. The same goes with if you have a very good quality silage in terms of overdoing it from the dry cow point of view. But even from, I suppose, if you take young heifers that are potentially going to be, going to the bull at the next April, they don't have, I suppose, the silage they're on is going to be very important in the first winter. They won't get away with probably, I'm going to say, mediocre silage in terms of, and a wee bit behind their targets, because, let's call a spade. They have to calve down on a fairly tight timeline. Typically a lot of farms are operating off 24 months now. So it's very important that you take that corrective action now, is probably what I would say, and know what you're dealing with.
I think sometimes it's a good idea as well, if you are doing body condition scoring on farm, it's no harm to ask a friend or a family member to do it with you, because I suppose farmers are used to looking at their own animals every day, walking in and out of the parlour. It's hard to see a sudden change in body condition score when you're looking at them every day, so it's just handy to have someone else, another point of view. And
I suppose it's if there's a proportion of the herd there that you see, it's just a matter of taking a bit of time. There's typically 3 areas that you sort of evaluate. So you're looking across, I suppose, the tail head, you're running your hand across the ribs. Obviously, if they're completely covered, it's a very fat cow who maybe put on extra condition in the back end due to low milk yields and whatnot. But then I suppose typically then, just across the top of the triangle there, you're feeling then on those top ribs there as well. So you're just trying to get evaluation of where it's at. The flat of your hand rubbing them across the animal will tell you, and from there you're gauging 0 obviously is or 1 being the thinnest, 5 being over fat.
Yeah.
So look, I think that will conclude this podcast. Any, I suppose, in keeping in the common routine as our predecessor James, he would always throw in a few questions at the end to round up. Any concluding remarks, folks?
I suppose for me, just whatever you decide to do now is going to prime you up for next year. So take your silage sample, know what you're working with, and supply accordingly.
Super job.
Yeah, I'd follow on from that. On the tillage front, start planning early for your nutrient management plan.
Yeah, I suppose to come at it from a different angle, November is a time for mental health. So it's good that farmers, keep an eye on that, ask for help when it's needed, but also your physical health as well. It's important to get yourself checked up on and do your own NCT. We're great at getting the Jeep and the tractor and all that checked up. It's very important to check up on yourself, especially when you're very busy and you're lacking help. Things can get out of hand. So
yeah, no, all very valid points, and that's a very good point, John. I think in the context of everything we talked about there, everything we're nearly doing is around some sort of a policy regulation change, and I suppose the pressure that comes with that, the lack of ability to be able to plan with your farm business and financial borrowings, it does create a lot of pressure mentally on farms, so that is a very valuable point. So something I always wanted to say, mind yourself folks, farm smart, farm safe.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Sod Pod. We hope you enjoyed it. To find out more, head over to www.grasslandagro.ie or check out our social channels: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn and YouTube. That's all for this episode. See you next time.